Yeah, good afternoon. James Quinn, your instructor. I will be going over chapter 3. I wanted to make some new videos because the ones I had, the examples were kind of blurry. You couldn't really see what I was doing. Could hear fairly well, but I'll just go ahead and get started with this. You have these PowerPoints already. We're going to be talking about measures of central tendency, measures of variation, like variance, standard deviation, things like that. Measures of position, those standard deviations, and kind of what they contain. And then we're going to be looking at some data analysis. How can we analyze data? Last chapter we kind of talked about how we categorize data and how we sort data out, and now we can start to look at analyzing it. I'm not going to read you all this stuff. You have these PowerPoints, so I'll just kind of dive right in. What we're going to look at today is going to be the average, and that's going to be called the mean. Or in a population, it's called mu, and in a sample, it's just called the sample mean. We're going to talk about variation, and what that's going to be is how the data varies. And we talked about the range. The range tells us kind of what the range of the data is. It takes a high data point and a low data point, and that value in between is going to give us a range. We also can talk about mid-range and position on some point on a distribution of scores. So that's kind of what we're going to look at. The mean is the average. So the mean of a distribution is going to be taking all the data, and you're going to add all that data up, and you're going to divide by how many data points there are. So if you have, I'll just give you a real quick example. So if we have data like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, of course n is going to equal 5 because I have 5 data points, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, if I want to find the average, sigma is going to tell me to sum or add, and it's going to tell me to add the x's up, and each one of these represents x. So 1 is x, 2 is x, 3 is x, 4 is x, and 5 is x. Sometimes you'll see this in some textbooks as xi. Some of the newer textbooks is just x. Now I'm going to divide by n. So take all the sum of x. When I sum all this stuff up, 5 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1 is going to equal 15. So the sum of x is equal to 15 divided by n, which is 5. And that should give me a grand total of the average, and this is my little formula for the average, is going to be 3. And as you can see, 3 right here is right in the center of the distribution. So if we look at this data from low to high, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, the middle value, the median here, is going to be the middle value. So in this case, in this data set, my middle value is 3. So a lot of times with symmetrical distributions, the mean and the median are going to equal the same thing. We're going to talk about something called the normal curve, and with normal data, the mean, or mu, and the median are always going to be in the middle of that distribution. On our example of data that you had with the distribution table at the frequency distribution, you notice that that data kind of looked like this. So it was skewed. It wasn't normal. We had low values, and then we had extremely high values. So it looked a little different than normal. So we're going to be able to identify different distributions. So the mean is the average, the median is the middle of the distribution, and the mode is going to be, we don't have a mode here. So I don't have, if you had this, it would be no mode. But if we had a mode, let's say that 3 was, occurred 2 times in this data set, then 3 would be the mode. So the mode is the number that occurs most often in a data set. And then we'll talk about the mid-range and the weighted mean, but I'll cover that later on in the lecture. Basically, like your GPA and things like that are weighted means. So we'll cover that.